When it comes to Rome's expansion, there are three wars that can't be ignored. The three wars with Veti marked the beginning of Rome's territorial expansion. The Punic Wars saw Rome conquer Carthage and dominate the Mediterranean. The Macedonian Wars led to Rome conquering Greece and becoming the dominant power in the Western world. Rome grew from a small state on the Italian peninsula into an empire spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa, mainly due to these three wars during the Republic era. During this period, most of Rome's wars were initiated by them with little resistance. The Second Punic War was particularly brutal, almost leading to Rome's destruction, thanks to their opponent Carthage, producing a military strategist of legendary status, Hannibal. In the 3rd century BC, Rome had already become a formidable power in the Mediterranean, while the old powerhouse Carthage lay across the sea to the south. Both wanted to turn the Mediterranean into their own bathtub, but neither was strong enough to completely dominate it, so they ended up clashing head-on. Sicily, sandwiched between Rome and Carthage, became the main battlefield for this war. Originally a Greek territory with many city-states including the powerful Syracuse, which had been at odds with Carthage for over 2 centuries before Rome's arrival. When Rome grew strong enough to aim for Sicily as its own sphere of influence, Syracuse couldn't fight both simultaneously, and decided to make peace with Carthage first, then deal with Rome later. However, they were unexpectedly defeated by the Roman bullies. Seeing this, the Syracusans quickly switched sides, abandoning their old enemy Carthage in favor of an alliance with Rome. This allowed Rome to incorporate eastern Sicily into its sphere of influence. Carthage could stand being humiliated and immediately returned home to regroup and launch attacks from the sea against Rome. Surprisingly, Rome had never fought a naval battle before and built their ships on the fly, yet they somehow won. Seeing this, Rome thought, "Wow, we're actually pretty good," and started provoking Carthage constantly, winning or losing but never backing down until Carthage surrendered in a decisive sea battle around 241 BC, ending the war after 24 years with a Pyrrhic victory for Rome. After the First Punic War, Carthage was forced to cede territory and pay reparations, an unbearable humiliation for this former Mediterranean superpower. Hamilcar Barca, one of Carthage's great generals who fought against Rome for over 2 decades, could accept this outcome and brainwashed his son Hannibal with a sense of national pride and revenge. Raised on a diet of hatred education, Hannibal grew up determined to destroy Rome. Like me, fellow comrades raised under the red flag can imagine what kind of upbringing he had. First, Hamilcar likely told him that Romans were an inferior race, inherently depraved, skilled in debauchery and incestuous practices, and their destruction would cleanse the world. Then he might have detailed how Rome massacred unarmed Carthaginian civilians, committing unspeakable atrocities against them. He may even have fabricated stories about relatives being beheaded by Romans and turned into drinking cups, adding insult to injury. It is no wonder that Hannibal grew up with a burning desire for vengeance. Better the whole of Africa be covered in graves than let Rome live. By 219 BC, Hannibal had matured into an excellent general, taking over his father's operations in Iberia and preparing to fulfill his destiny. For him, there was only one way to achieve this: destroying Rome. Coincidentally, Rome and Carthage were already clashing over the city of Saguntum in Iberia. Hannibal saw an opportunity for revenge and left a small force with his brother Hasdrubal while leading his army against Rome. Although Rome anticipated Carthage's move and had fortified its defenses along the coast and plains, they never imagined that their enemy would attack from behind via the Alps. Yes, Hannibal employed a strategy so audacious it bordered on madness, crossing the treacherous Alps to strike at Rome directly. The Alps average 3,000 meters in altitude with year-round snow cover, making them virtually impassable for most armies. To execute this plan, Carthage lost a third of its forces, but those who survived were hardened by their ordeal and filled with hatred for Rome. They marched on Roman soil with the resolve to take as many Romans down with them as possible, rushing towards Rome, who would be scared seeing this. Right, so the Hannibal army that came down from the sky really frightened the Roman Senate. They hurriedly mobilized all the generals with military power to head north to fight. The first Roman legion to meet them was led by General Hasdrubal's old comrade, but they could stand a chance against Hannibal's buffed up army and retreated south of the Po River. Then came another general, Tiberius, leading 40,000 troops, roughly equal in strength to Hannibal's forces. So Tiberius decided to cross the river and attack Hannibal directly, but ended up falling into his trap, suffering a devastating defeat with over 30,000 soldiers becoming cannon fodder, leaving only about 10,000 survivors escaping back home. With Hannibal approaching their doorstep, Rome had no choice but to initiate partial mobilization, conscripting tens of thousands of troops and handing them over to newly elected consuls Servilius and Flaminius, each leading an army to guard the two southern routes down south. But Hannibal didn't follow the usual path through the Apennine Mountains. Instead, he descended along the central mountain range, burning, looting, and killing all the way down. When Flaminius learned of this, he hurriedly led his troops in pursuit, but only caught up with Hannibal at Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal had set a perfect ambush spot between mountains and lakes on a narrow plain. The Carthaginian army was already well hidden on the hills above, so when Flaminius' forces arrived, they were ambushed and completely annihilated by Hannibal's troops. After 3 consecutive defeats, Rome realized it needed to concentrate its efforts. So they elected a dictator who could more efficiently mobilize manpower and resources, essentially acting as a temporary king. This emergency king was Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, known simply as Fabius. He knew that Rome didn't have the strength to face Hannibal head on at this point, so he adopted a strategy of harassing Hannibal's army with small forces while training new recruits and building up strength. Simply put, it was delaying tactics, not engaging in decisive battles until fully prepared, but also not letting Hannibal rest either. This became known as the Fabian strategy. From an omniscient perspective, this tactic was indeed clever. If sustained long enough, Rome would eventually wear down Hannibal's forces. But don't forget how cunning Hannibal is. He knew full well what such a strategy entailed and wasn't idle himself. Instead, he continued to ravage Roman territory, brutally treating civilians and prisoners of war alike, fueling hatred in his heart while provoking the Senate. As expected, this tactic worked again soon enough. The pro-war faction gained dominance within the Senate, insisting that Rome could afford to delay any longer and must confront Hannibal immediately. Although a dictator was akin to a king, it was still only temporary with a term limit. So when Fabius' dictatorship ended, he was promptly dismissed. The Senate then quickly conscripted twice as many soldiers as Hannibal had, 80,000 troops, led by 2 newly appointed consuls, Paulus and Varro, to confront Hannibal decisively. This unprecedented mobilization of such a large force under dual leadership in Roman history was met with glee from Hannibal, who had been waiting for just this moment after nearly being worn down by Fabius' tactics. When the Roman army reached Cannae, where Hannibal's forces were stationed, they fell into another trap laid by Hannibal. He positioned himself at the center, fighting bravely, while concentrating his elite troops on both flanks. The Romans assumed his best soldiers were in the middle and pushed hard there, but Hannibal was retreating strategically, gradually encircling the Roman army. Thus, Hannibal achieved yet another military miracle, defeating a numerically superior Roman force with minimal losses of just 7,000 troops, while inflicting casualties of over 70,000 on Rome, an astonishing ratio of 1 to 10 for expendable soldiers. This left Rome's fighting forces nearly depleted and teetering on the brink of national collapse. From crossing the Alps in autumn 218 BC to his decisive victory at Cannae on the 2nd of August, 216 BC, Hannibal led a few thousand elite troops across enemy territory, undefeated and unchallenged, truly unprecedented in history. Knowing from childhood what he was destined for, Hannibal remained remarkably calm despite repeated victories. He understood that it wasn't the right time to push further into Rome yet. His forces were depleting without reinforcements, while advancing deeper alone risked failure. So instead of pressing on, he consolidated control over southern Italy, selling Roman prisoners as slaves or executing them to reduce burdens, and simultaneously sought alliances with anti-Roman city-states while undermining Rome's allies. He waited for either Carthage, his allies, or his brother Hasdrubal in Iberia to send reinforcements. Once adequately reinforced and secure at home, he planned to crush Rome completely. Such a person is truly terrifying, isn't so? How would Rome fare under Hannibal's relentless pressure? Fans of soccer might be familiar with Italy's national anthem, Il Canto degli Italiani, or the Song of the Mazzini. Few know that this song was inspired by it originates from the Second Punic War. Saying this, everyone can guess that Rome must have bounced back again. That is right. At this time, 1/5 of adult Roman citizens had already died in battle. The Senate could only take a gamble and mobilize the entire nation. Anyone over 17 years old was sent to fight. It was under such circumstances that Sulpicius, who was just barely 20 years old, became Rome's general. Yes, you heard it right. General, because his father and uncle had already become cannon fodder. In any case, Sulpicius put on his helmet, with a resolve to die, and threw himself into the Second Punic War. The first line of Mamatine's song goes like this: "Brothers, Italy has awakened." Wearing Sulpicius' helmet symbolizes Rome's revival after setbacks. On the other hand, Hannibal's teammates started dropping the ball one by one. First was Carthage, his motherland. Due to Hannibal being away at war for years, the Carthaginian Senate gradually fell into the hands of political rivals, making it impossible for him to get reinforcements from home. Then there was Macedonia, which originally promised to send troops to aid Hannibal, but ended up having its plans intercepted by Rome. As a result, Hannibal's much anticipated reinforcements once again failed to materialize. At this point, Hannibal could only rely on his brother Hasdrubal, who was stationed in Iberia. But just as fate would have it, Sulpicius invaded Iberia at that moment. By now everyone can see that Rome knew Hannibal lacked manpower and wouldn't dare advance hastily, so they decided to wage overseas wars, indirectly weakening Hannibal by preventing him from getting new cannon fodder, while restoring their own strength to turn the tide of war. Simply put, it was back to attrition tactics. Indeed, these tactics proved effective. In 209 BC, Sulpicius defeated Hasdrubal in Iberia, although he could stop the latter's entry into Italy. This unfortunate Carthaginian army, after crossing the Alps with great difficulty, was wiped out by another Roman general. Hannibal never expected that while waiting for reinforcements to destroy Rome, what he got instead were bloody heads from his homeland. At this moment, Rome was both close and far away. He might have sensed the scent of destiny at this point. It was then that Sulpicius began a long-distance expedition against Carthage, bringing war to enemy territory. The tide turned completely under Hannibal's shadow. Sulpicius marched fearfully onto African soil. At that moment, the Carthaginians finally tasted what Romans had once felt: terror. The Carthaginian Senate was utterly panicked and ordered Hannibal to return home quickly. By now, Hannibal had been away for 15 years. To avoid suspicion of disloyalty from domestic officials, he sadly bid farewell to the Apennine Peninsula he conquered over many years. When Hannibal rushed back to Africa with his exhausted army, a well-rested Roman force was already arrayed at Zama. Seeing things weren't looking good, Hannibal sent his war elephants charging through the lines, but Sulpicius had prepared for this. He stretched out his formation and kept intervals between phalanxes so that elephants could disrupt them. Meanwhile, he used trumpets to scare away the elephants, which caused many of them to run back towards Carthage. The outcome was almost decided at this moment. In the end, Sulpicius sacrificed 5,000 cannon fodder, but wiped out nearly 40,000 enemies. Poor Hannibal, who had roamed enemy territory for years and came so close to destroying Rome, ended up being destroyed on his own soil. His dream of turning Carthage into a graveyard while wiping out Romans was only half realized. Thus the Second Punic War, which lasted for 18 years, concluded with another Roman victory. Carthage again signed an unequal treaty with Rome and ceded territory and paid reparations. Hannibal's fate was even more tragic. In 1995 BC, under pressure from Romans, he fled, but wherever he went, Romans pursued him, fearing a comeback. In despair, Hannibal finally took his own life by poison in 1983 BC. 30 years later, in 953 BC, Roman conservative politician Cato visited Carthage at the Senate's request. Having personally experienced living under Hannibal's shadow when he was young, an 80-year-old Cato was shocked to see Carthage thriving again, and immediately urged the Senate to take military action against it upon his return, shouting Carthage must be destroyed. Rome launched the Third Punic War on a trumped-up charge and literally razed Carthage, born into a military family with exceptional talent in warfare and ambition for world domination. Hannibal seemed destined to play the male lead, but fate had other plans. A young Sulpicius defeated him and became immortalized as a result. Why was this? The answer is simple. The Punic Wars were just imperialist wars between two great powers where both sides were merely pawns of history. We should be grateful that such empires have been swept into the dustbin of history. In Greek mythology, there is a story about Greece's first warrior, Achilles, facing two life choices. Participating in the Trojan War would lead to an early death but eternal fame as a hero. At home picking his toes, he will live a long and happy life but remains unknown. However, Achilles decisively chose to pick his toes at home, even dressing up as a woman to avoid war. Eventually, the cunning Odysseus recognized him, forcing him to abide by the oath that whoever steals Helen would be fought against by all. He was thus forced onto the battlefield. As the number one warrior of Greece, only he had the ability to kill Hector, the prince of Troy. But the divine realm said that if Hector died, Achilles would die too, so he refused to kill Hector, dragging the war on for 10 years. Living another day is a day gained. It wasn't until his best friend Patroclus was killed in battle that Achilles felt life had no meaning and finally met his death with dignity.